We took to the saddle that morning and went thundering across the Catawba River. We was headed straight for him like a lightning bolt. We're gonna put an end to this threat. We got right outside of Gilberttown and the sky opened up on us. It began to pour down the rain. So we squatted under a group of cedar trees trying to keep our powder dry, praying that the rain would stop, but it didn't let up. So we pushed on. We got right outside of Gilberttown. We tied our horses up into the tree lines, took our rifles, and we moved in on foot. We went screaming out in that field where Ferguson was at. He was gone. There was nothing there but cold campfires. He'd been gone for 2 days. And even the best of the scouts couldn't find his trail. The ground was like a swamp. One of our commanders, a man by the name of William, spoke up and said, well, he's headed south. He's headed to that big British fort, Fort 96. So we turned and we started riding in that direction because we had to catch him. Now the next night we was camped down on the Green River. In the middle of the night I never heard such a commotion. A man come riding into our camp. Some of the boys drug him out of the saddle going to hang him, thought he was a spy. He said, my name's Colonel Edward Lacey. Take me up to see the commanders. So we drug him up to the commanders. Sure enough, that's who it was. Colonel Sevier knew him. Colonel Lacey asked him, sir, where are you boys going? He said, we're riding toward Fort 96. We got to catch Patrick Ferguson. He said, I don't know where you got your information, but you're riding the wrong way. Ferguson ain't headed to Fort 96. He's headed to Charlottetown to get reinforcements from Cornwallis. And now we got scared because we all knew, we knew good and well, if he got reinforcements, none of us would ever cross the mountains again. So Lacey had a group of Patriot fighters camped a few miles from us. He agreed to meet us the next day at a place called the Cowpens. We got up that morning and we rode 29 miles that day in the pouring rain. We come riding into the Cowpens. Colonel Lacey was there with his men. Now, the Cowpens was owned by a wealthy loyalist. He'd buy up all the cattle in that area, graze them on that good grass, and then he'd pay men to drive them north to Philadelphia and sell them. We come riding in there, we hadn't had a bite to eat since we left Quaker Meadows. And I can honestly say that none of us were a thief. But I remember hearing the Reverend Oak say one time, the Lord helps those that help herself. So that's what we did. We helped ourselves to that man's beef. Didn't think he'd carry a whole lot because we was all starved. And every one of us had a rifle. And that was the best meal we'd had in days. And as we sat there in the pouring rain that evening, once again the commanders had met, made a decision. They come walking through our camps that evening and they started picking out 900 of the best men. They picked out 900 of the best horses that we hadn't rode into the ground chasing Ferguson. And I'll never forget it. At 9 o'clock at night, we took to the saddle. We rode off in the dark in the pouring rain, looking for Ferguson. All night long we rode through the darkness. Couldn't see the horse in front of you, but we wouldn't let up. We crossed the Broad River in the middle of the night. It was completely flooded. We put our strongest horses downstream in case anybody washed out of the saddle. There was nothing going to stop us. Now, the next morning, we rode up on a little homestead, a little house. Had a young man traveling with us. Enoch was his name, Enoch Gilmer. Little Enoch said, I got an idea. He's telling the commanders, if you let me ride over to that house, I'll find out where Ferguson's at. So we laid back in the woods and little Enoch rode across the fields, rode up to the house, tied his horse off, walked up on the porch, knocked on the door, and there were 2 women living there. Little Enoch looked as mean as he could. He said, I'm looking for Patrick Ferguson. I want to join his army. One of the ladies said, well, I know exactly where he's at because we took him eggs. He's on Kings Mountain. Now, the men give Enoch just about enough time. They figure he found out what they needed. They busted in the door, grabbed little Enoch, going to hang him as a traitor. And them women commenced to squabbling. Well, don't hang him. He's just a boy. One of the men spoke up and said, well, not to offend these lovely ladies, let's take him down the road and hang him. So they drug him out of the house where the women couldn't see him. Commanders called him up and said, Enoch, did you find Ferguson? He said, yeah, he's on Kings Mountain. So now we knew exactly where he's at. and we was riding harder than we'd ever ridden, because this threat was going to end, and it was going to end today. You know, about lunch, a lot of the men were starting to wear down, and they wanted to stop and rest. And I can remember like it was yesterday. Old Isaac Shelby come riding right through our lines. He said, "Rest? I will not rest until I ride through the lines of Cornwallis himself." He fired us up, and we kept riding. Now, right before 3 o'clock, by the grace of God, the rain stopped, and we were at the bottom of Kings Mountain. William Campbell and them boys from Virginia took the front of that little mountain. Isaac Shelby and the boys from the Holston settlement went around this side. Lacey, other commanders took the back. Colonel Sevier took all us boys from the Watauga. We went around this side of the mountain. We had him. He wasn't going anywhere. We hit that mountain the first time, and they pushed us back. We hit that mountain the second time. We went a little further, but once again, they pushed us back. But the third time we hit that little mountain, we went almost to the top. We was so close on them, some of our boys was fighting with their knives and tomahawks against their bayonets. We hit that mountain the third time. You know, a lot of us older men remember when the Cherokees would attack the settlements. Man, they'd come screaming out of them woods. It would make your hair stand up. It'd make your skin crawl. So as we hit that mountain the third time, we were screaming our heads off like the Cherokee. But not only were we screaming like the Cherokee, we were fighting like the Cherokee, because we had learned well. We was hiding behind the trees and rocks. We'd step out and fire and step back in and reload. And like I said, we went almost to the top. And sure enough, there was Ferguson. He was on a big white horse. Had his saber in one hand, 2 silver whistles. He was riding back and forward on that little mountain, blowing those whistles, barking out commands to his men. You know, a lot of his boys seen that we was overrunning them. They'd try to raise up a white flag. Ferguson come riding by and just cut it down. Now, to this day, I can't tell you if he's trying to escape. I can't tell you if he's trying to rally his men. But what I can tell you for a fact is, he got too far on the south side of that little mountain that day, and he ran smack into John Sevier and us boys from the Watauga. I was standing behind a big white oak tree. Every time I stick my head around to shoot, the bark would fly off. I could hear all the lead rifle balls as they whistled by me. The air was completely full of gun smoke. Couldn't even see who we was shooting at, but we wouldn't let up shooting. There was a young man over from me that day. John Gilliland was his name. Little John had been wounded 3 times. He was still at the top of that mountain. I heard him say, "Here comes Ferguson." He raised his rifle and he took a real careful aim. And when he pulled the trigger, it went click, it misfired. But there was an older gentleman over from him that day. Everybody in the settlement knew this man. Robert Young was his name. Robert was 62 years old. Now for you folks that don't know, Robert named his rifle after his wife, Mary. But he didn't call his rifle Mary, he called her Sweet Lips, because that's what he called Mary. I seen old Robert raise that rifle. He took a real careful aim. I heard him say, "We'll see what Sweet Lips can do." And when he pulled that trigger, bam, Ferguson came out of the saddle. But his foot was hung in the stirrup and his horse spooked. You know, by the time the boys got his horse stopped, he had 8 more holes through him. Ferguson told his men when he got to Kings Mountain, he said, "God Almighty and his angels won't take me off this mountain." He didn't realize how right he was, because that's where we left him. Every man that was fighting with Ferguson that day were killed or captured, and they were 28 patriots that never seen the sunset. We camped at the bottom of that little old mountain that night, and to this day I can hear the sounds of the wounded and the dying. The next day we started marching the prisoners north toward the Yadkin River. A few days later we sent some boys marching them on, the rest of us turned and headed back over the mountain. You know, it took about a week for Cornwallis to find out we whipped old Ferguson so bad. But when he found out, well, he started retreating. Had no idea where this band of rabble, he called us, this over mountain army had went to. As a matter of fact, the last we heard of Cornwallis, old Nathaniel Green and Dan Morgan was running him ragged all over the mountains, and he was headed back toward the coast. But us over mountain men, we went back home. We went back over the mountain to raise our crops and to raise our family. But we didn't know it at the time. But the most important seed we ever planted was that day on that little old mountain. Because within an hour and 5 minutes, we planted the seed of freedom. Because what we did that day, it was nothing short of a miracle. Because there was a band of 900 starved, exhausted. Hunters and farmers volunteered to the last man. We stopped and we forced the retreat of the most powerful army in the world, and then we went home.